Before a single missile was fired, a silent war was already raging, of wills, of principles, of pride. And when America finally struck Iran's hidden nuclear sites, the world held its breath. But what happened next wasn't surrender. It wasn't chaos. It was something far more powerful. Defiance. This isn't just about geopolitics or warfare. This is about the spirit of a nation tested under fire, the unity of a people who refuse to be broken, and the moment the world realized that strength isn't always found in who strikes first, but in who refuses to fall. In this powerful speech, you'll witness the storm, the silence, the resistance, and the rise of a voice that cannot be silenced. Every second of this story carries the weight of a history that refuses to bow and a future that's still being written. So lean in, listen closely, because what you're about to hear may change the way you see power, purpose, and pride forever. The United States launched a surprise and highly coordinated strike on Iran's suspected hidden nuclear sites, marking a turning point in an already tense geopolitical standoff. This was not a random act of aggression, but a calculated move executed with surgical precision, relying on cutting-edge satellite surveillance, cyber intelligence, and stealth drone technology. The targets were not the well-known public nuclear facilities long monitored by the IAEA and foreign observers, and instead the operation aimed at undisclosed, deeply buried installations that Western intelligence agencies claimed were part of Iran's covert weapons development program. This raised the stakes significantly, as such a strike implied the U.S. had gone beyond diplomatic pressure and public rhetoric into the shadows of warfare, choosing destruction over dialogue. The timing of the strike was critical. It came during a period of intense international distraction, allowing Washington to act swiftly with minimal global coordination or consensus. The objective was clear: send a message to Tehran and the world that America still holds military superiority and is willing to use it, unilaterally if necessary, to halt what it perceives as existential threats. It wasn't just about nuclear weapons. It was about restoring deterrence, reclaiming dominance in the region, and demonstrating to both allies and adversaries that American red lines still matter. But this surprise assault also carried broader implications. By avoiding any official declaration of war or engagement through the United Nations, the U.S. sidestepped international law and diplomatic process. This triggered outrage in some quarters and quiet endorsement in others, depending on strategic alignments. Inside Washington, the decision was defended as necessary for national security, while critics warned it could lead to prolonged conflict or ignite regional instability. The strike targeted bunkers hidden under mountains, research labs buried in deserts, and communication networks housed deep within civilian infrastructure. Each detonation symbolized not just the destruction of physical assets, but a direct challenge to Iran's sovereignty and self-determination. This action was not merely a military maneuver. It was a loud declaration that America was no longer content with containment or negotiation. It signaled a shift from diplomacy to preemption, from caution to confrontation. And in doing so, it exposed the raw, volatile nature of global power struggles, where veiled threats can turn into thunderous explosions without warning. Despite the precision and intensity of the U.S. strike, Iran demonstrated a level of resilience that caught many observers off guard. In the immediate aftermath, Western analysts expected widespread damage, chaos, and disarray within Iran's strategic command structure. But what unfolded defied those expectations. Iran's layered defense systems, both physical and digital, had clearly been prepared for such an eventuality. Missile shields intercepted several incoming drones and cruise missiles, and backup systems kicked in swiftly to preserve communications between critical military units. Hidden beneath the surface was a far more advanced level of preparedness than previously acknowledged by foreign intelligence communities. Iran's nuclear infrastructure, believed to be clustered in a few visible locations, was instead spread across a complex network of underground tunnels, remote facilities, and mobile units. This decentralization meant that while some sites were struck and damaged, others remained fully operational. Engineers and security teams had rehearsed emergency protocols. Within hours, power was restored to affected systems, data was transferred to secure locations, and command personnel regrouped in alternative bunkers, signaling continuity amidst the storm. Satellite images released days later showed portions of facilities still intact, emitting signals and energy outputs consistent with functioning operations. Furthermore, Iran's ability to control the internal narrative added to its show of strength. State media downplayed the impact of the strikes while highlighting footage of citizens rallying, soldiers regrouping, and military leaders inspecting sites with composed expressions. The psychological war was just as crucial as the physical one, and Tehran played it with remarkable discipline. Messages were sent to both friend and foe. Iran was not shattered. It was standing, calculating, and unbroken. International observers were surprised at the speed with which Iran recovered and projected stability. While America showcased its firepower, Iran showcased its endurance. The real revelation wasn't just that hidden facilities existed, it was that Iran had long expected an attack on them and had quietly built an infrastructure that could absorb the blow without collapsing. This moment revealed a new reality in global warfare. Strength is no longer defined solely by who strikes first, but by who stands last. Iran, against the odds, had shown the world that resistance isn't always loud and aggressive. Sometimes it's silent, fortified, and waiting in the shadows. In the wake of the U.S. strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites, something remarkable unfolded within the Iranian populace. A surge of unity that transcended political, social, and religious divisions. Rather than plunging into fear or internal dissent, Iranians across the nation appeared galvanized by the attack. The very act meant to weaken their resolve seemed to harden it instead. The streets filled with people waving flags, reciting national slogans, and expressing unwavering support for their country's sovereignty. Images of civilians standing beside soldiers, clerics walking among youth activists, and even dissenting voices calling for national solidarity captured a moment when internal disputes were temporarily suspended in the face of foreign aggression. In urban centers like Tehran, Shiraz, and Mashhad, citizens turned out in spontaneous gatherings, not just in protest, but in declaration of unity. Even those critical of government policy saw the airstrike as a violation of Iran's dignity, something no ideology could excuse. What America may have hoped would fracture Iran's political core instead welded it tighter. At least in the short term, the sense of external threat erased. For the moment, the lines that had divided reformists, moderates, and hardliners. This emotional convergence was not orchestrated from the top. It grew organically, fueled by a shared cultural memory of resistance and survival. Iran has long been a nation forged in the fires of struggle, from its long war with Iraq to decades of economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Each chapter of hardship created a cultural instinct of resilience, and the recent strike only stirred that instinct to the surface again. Young people, many of whom had grown disillusioned with politics, now found a renewed sense of purpose. Social media was flooded, not with despair, but with poetry, music, and art that captured the spirit of standing tall in defiance. Elders recalled past battles, while youth vowed to carry the torch forward. This was not just nationalism. It was a spiritual and emotional alignment, a deep-rooted belief that no external force should dictate the fate of a proud, ancient civilization. Even within Iran's diaspora, a conversation shifted. Those who had criticized the government still expressed outrage at the attack, seeing it as a threat to the Iranian people, not just their leaders. This unity, born not out of fear but of defiance, became one of Iran's most powerful responses. It showed that beyond military strength lies something even harder to destroy: collective identity and national pride. The global reaction to the U.S. strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites revealed a fractured international order and deep divisions among world powers. In Washington, the move was framed as a decisive act of national security and a necessary step to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons under the radar. However, this narrative was not universally accepted. Several NATO allies, including France and Germany, expressed unease over the unilateral nature of the strike, stating that it undermined international diplomacy and risked igniting a broader conflict in an already volatile region. These allies had long advocated for continued negotiations and adherence to international nuclear agreements, and they saw the strike as a setback to global non-proliferation efforts. Russia and China were far more direct in their condemnation. Moscow called the strike a blatant violation of international law and accused the United States of acting as a global enforcer without accountability. Beijing warned that such aggressive actions would only deepen instability and further isolate. These reactions were not merely political posturing. They signaled a realignment in global alliances, where opposition to American unilateralism became a unifying cause among rival powers. The United Nations Security Council called for an emergency meeting, but no resolution could be passed due to the conflicting positions of its permanent members. The gridlock exposed the limitations of global governance structures when major powers collide. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the response was far more muted and complex. Gulf states, traditionally aligned with Washington, chose silence over support, reflecting their fear of becoming battlegrounds in a larger conflict. Israel quietly praised the move, while Turkey and Qatar warned of the consequences of unchecked escalation. Iran's regional allies, such as Hezbollah and groups in Iraq and Syria, issued veiled threats, hinting at potential retaliation, not just militarily, but through asymmetric and proxy means. The region braced for uncertainty, with borders put on high alert and air defenses activated across multiple nations. The societies worldwide were equally polarized. In Western democracies, protests erupted in major cities with demonstrators decrying war and imperialism. Activists argued that the strike represented a failure of diplomacy and a return to Cold War-era tactics. At the same time, conservative media and political voices hailed it as a necessary display of strength. The global conversation became one not just about the strike itself, but about what kind of world order humanity was headed toward. One led by force, or one guided by dialogue and mutual respect. In the aftermath of the U.S. strike, Iran's leadership took to the global stage not with anger-filled threats, but with a tone of somber determination that carried profound weight. In a nationally broadcast address that was translated and replayed across multiple countries, Iran's supreme leader and key government officials delivered a carefully crafted message that blended defiance with calculated restraint. They did not deny the damage, nor did they resort to hollow rhetoric. Instead, they reminded the world that while missiles can destroy buildings, they cannot shake the foundations of a people determined to define their own future. The tone was not that of a wounded nation, but of a tested one, scarred, yet unbowed. Speech began by invoking Iran's long history of resistance, not only against foreign powers, but against centuries of invasions and upheavals. This historical context set the stage for a narrative that was larger than any one incident. The leadership portrayed the strike as another chapter in Iran's centuries-old struggle for sovereignty, a reminder that the country has endured far more devastating attacks in the past and has always risen stronger. They emphasized the nation's resilience and its refusal to be bullied into submission, presenting the attack not as a strategic defeat, but as proof of why Iran's independence remains non-negotiable. Rather than focusing on retaliation, the speech focused on endurance, on what it means to carry the burden of dignity under fire. They addressed the Iranian people directly, commending their unity, their calm, and their refusal to descend into panic or chaos. The tone of the message made it clear that retaliation would come in forms that would extend beyond the battlefield. It would be measured, multidimensional, and perhaps most importantly, rooted in long-term strategy rather than emotional impulse. Economic self-reliance, diplomatic pressure, regional influence, and cyber capabilities were all hinted at as part of Iran's toolkit in a new era of confrontation. What gave the speech its global resonance was the contrast it struck with the silence or division from other world leaders. In a moment where the international community seemed either complicit or indifferent, Iran used its voice to draw a clear line, not just politically, but morally. The message was aimed not only at its enemies, but at neutral nations, activists, and global thinkers who believe in justice, sovereignty, and balance of power. By doing so, Iran transformed itself from a target into a symbol of endurance, of resistance, and of unshakable identity in the face of overwhelming force. The strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites exposed more than just underground facilities. It laid bare the growing conflict between raw power and principled resistance. On one side stood the United States, wielding unmatched military capability, projecting dominance with cutting-edge weaponry and precision intelligence. On the other stood Iran, battered but unbroken, refusing to submit even in the face of overwhelming force. This was not a traditional clash between two equal armies. It was a confrontation between a superpower determined to assert control and a regional nation unwilling to be dictated to. The airstrike wasn't just a tactical move. It was a symbol of how the world's most powerful nations often operate outside the bounds of dialogue, choosing might over mutual respect. This moment became a global litmus test. Could one nation bomb another into submission without consequence? Would the world accept dominance disguised as security? Iran's defiance became more than just a political reaction. It became a philosophical one. Their leaders, intellectuals, and citizens alike framed the situation not as a war over weapons, but as a war over values. They argued that sovereignty cannot be negotiated under pressure, and that principles matter more than the convenience of compliance. Iran's refusal to collapse or retaliate blindly spoke volumes. In doing so, it forced a global audience to confront a deeper question. What does strength really look like? In Washington, the strike was hailed by some as a necessary deterrent, but even within American circles, a growing number of voices questioned whether short-term dominance could justify long-term instability. The world has seen this pattern before, where intervention creates more resistance, where fear breeds defiance, and where aggression often results in unintended consequences. Iran's stance, quiet but firm, reminded the world that dignity can become its own form of resistance. While missiles destroy infrastructure, they can also forge stronger national identities, deeper unity, and an even more resolved adversary. This clash was not just between governments, but between ideologies. It was the embodiment of a new global era where smaller nations no longer fold in the face of larger ones, where technological superiority does not guarantee moral authority. Iran's silence in certain moments, its patience, its choice to speak before striking, all reflected a strategy rooted in legacy, culture, and a refusal to be defined by others. In that defiance lay a message the world could not ignore. Force may provoke fear, but it cannot manufacture respect. In the end, this is not just a story of missiles and military maneuvers. It is the story of a nation that refused to kneel. When America struck Iran's hidden nuclear sites, it may have believed it was delivering a final warning, a decisive blow to force compliance. But what it truly unleashed was something far more powerful: unity, identity, and unshakable defiance. Iran did not collapse. It did not panic, did not surrender. Instead, it stood tall, not because of the size of its arsenal, but because of the depth of its resolve. The world watched as one superpower chose dominance, and another power, rooted in history and pride, chose dignity. And in that moment, the battle lines of the future were drawn, not only across maps and borders, but across the values that define who we are and what we stand for. To every listener, let this be a reminder that true strength is not measured by how loud your weapons are, but by how deeply your convictions run. Nations rise and fall, but those that rise with purpose, stand with honor, and endure with patience, they write history, not just survive it. Thank you for listening. Stay inspired, stay informed, and may you always have the courage to stand for what is right, even when the world stands against you. Good luck, and may peace guide your path.